What if I told you that a book once read by early Christians claims to reveal forbidden knowledge about the origins of evil and the very calendar of heaven? The Book of Enoch, preserved in the Ethiopian tradition and cited by some church fathers, argues that there was more revealed to the ancestors than what later councils allowed into the canon. But why was this text marginalized and in many places erased from public reading? Today we will trace the claims of 1 Enoch and ask why a work that speaks of heavenly tablets, angelic juries, and a precise sacred year was removed from most Bibles. We will examine the book itself, compare its claims with Genesis and later Jewish and Christian tradition, and listen to scholars and translators who still treat it as a living witness. You will hear readings from 1 Enoch, see how its calendar and its angelic court challenge received scripture, and learn why communities like the Ethiopian Orthodox preserved it. If you have heard of Enoch before, write Enoch in the comments now and tell us where you learned about him. To understand the controversy, we must first step into the strange architecture the text describes. A cosmos run by emissaries of the Lord and recorded in tablets that pre-exist humanity. At the center of 1 Enoch is a cosmic order administered by angels who regulate lights and seasons and who keep a book of destinies. The book of the heavenly luminaries in 1 Enoch offers a precise solar pattern, a year of 364 days, and a scheme of months and feast days that differs sharply from lunar practice. In plain language, the text asserts that time itself was arranged by divine decree and placed under angelic supervision. Listen to the kind of claim it makes in its own terms. 1 Enoch 72:2 speaks of the courses of the sun and how it rises and sets by fixed laws. That is not a side note, but the structure by which festivals and righteous timing are measured in heaven. The consequence is theological, not merely astronomical. If time is law, then human calendars are liturgical obligations rather than civil conveniences. Compare this to the lunar calendars used by most ancient Near Eastern societies, and to the later rabbinic toleration of lunar months. Scholars like Dr. Habte, an Ethiopian manuscript specialist, point out that communities which preserved Enoch paired its calendar to ritual cycles in ways that still shape fasting and festival dates today. An archaeologist such as Dr. Sarah Levinson explains that inscriptions and astronomical fragments from the first centuries show a dialogue between solar and lunar reckoning, and that the presence of a 364-day scheme in an authoritative text would have immediate implications for how festivals are kept and how Sabbath is calculated. Sensory impressions help here. The glow of a sun chart scribed on vellum, the dry scent of dust in an archive, the crisp whisper of turning folios as a translator traces a line. Imagine tracing a spiral of ink on yellowed parchment, feeling the raised threads of the binding, hearing a distant chant that still counts weeks by a very different metrical law. These are the textures that bring the abstract claim into the lived world. The text does not stop at calendars. It casts angels not as passive attendants, but as governing officers. The Book of Watchers names leaders who teach and police cosmic order. That is why the phrase "written in this tradition" appears again and again. It was written in the heavenly tablets as a warrant for what is to come. The narrative of origin in 1 Enoch reframes several Genesis motifs. Creation and the giving of law are presented as processes tightly bound to celestial witnesses and to tablets that pre-exist history. Whereas Genesis describes God speaking and forming, Enoch adds a bureaucracy of angelic princes who record deeds and supervise the human stage. In 1 Enoch 1:9, the prophet voice pronounces coming judgment that the righteous will see while the wicked are removed. In the Book of the Watchers, the transgression that precipitates divine intervention is not a simple disobedience, but an illicit transmission of knowledge. When certain angels descend and instruct humanity in arts and crafts, they were forbidden to share. The story centers on figures named Semyaza and Azazel, who teach metallurgy, sorcery, and the secrets of the heavens. The act reads like a cosmic leak, a breach in the boundaries that order the cosmos and keep sacred knowledge within divine custody. In this telling, the Sabbath and the moral ordinances are not merely social customs, but expressions of how human time must align with heavenly statute. To paraphrase 1 Enoch, the law is not an afterthought. It is an aspect of cosmic governance, and those who break the order do not only offend God, they disturb the calendar of heaven. Here the texts speak its claim, and then pause to ask how different Christian and Jewish communities might have reacted when the law of time arrives already written among the stars. To bring the human element into focus, we turn to Enoch himself, the protagonist who becomes the book, and the book that becomes protagonist. His backstory matters, and it is a strange and compact life. Enoch, son of Jared, appears in Genesis as one who walked with God and was taken from the earth. The Enoch of 1 Enoch expands that mention into voyages into heaven, visions of celestial tablets, and dialogues with angelic guides. He moves from the shadows of ancestral genealogy to a role as an intermediary who brings knowledge down. He is father of Methuselah and ancestor of Noah. He lives in a generation where the illicit mixing of powers and people produces giants. Yet Enoch is set apart not by isolation, but by mission. He records what he sees and returns with warnings. In the Book of Parables, he is called the scribe of righteousness, a figure given authority to pronounce the fate of kings and the elect. A compact backstory will help us see why his voice carries weight among those who preserved his works. As a child, he is said to have walked between tables of law, listening to the songs of the stars. As a man, he receives books and orders and then passes them to his seed to guard. Methuselah is named in the margins as one who keeps watch, and Noah, who is forewarned, carries forward a covenant. Those familial ties turn the book into more than lore. It becomes lineage. The human stories that thread through the book dramatize the stakes. In a scene of Revelation, 1 Enoch presents Enoch in dialogue with the angel Uriel in a moment charged with sensory detail. Enoch speaks first, asking about the signs of heaven and the fate of the watchers. Uriel answers, and then questions follow with rising urgency. The exchange stretches across 5 brief turns to give weight to the revelation. "Who are those who transgressed the order of the heavens?" asks Enoch. "They are called watchers," replies Uriel. "They left their station and taught forbidden arts." Enoch asks, "What will become of their children?" And Uriel answers, "Giants roam the earth, and their blood cries out." Enoch presses, "Can the wrong be undone?" And Uriel responds, "Judgment will come, and the tablets record it." These short speeches carry the rhythm of a courtroom. The light of strange constellations is described. The air tastes metallic with foreboding, and the floor underfoot feels like a sea of cold stars. Scent enters the scene, a sulphurous memory of old transgression mixing with the must of ancient ink. Touch is invoked in the description of the tablets, their edges cold as morning frost and embossed with runes that catch the light. Sight is dominant, the vault of heaven painted with measures and scales. Sound appears as the low murmur of ledgering angels tallying guilt and merit. Those sensory notes make the dialogue bodily and urgent. The narrative then moves from the drama of sin to the figure of Noah, the preservation of lineage, and the fate of nations. If Enoch speaks warnings, Noah acts in preservation. Names matter. Jared, Methuselah, Enoch, Noah are companions in a family story where knowledge is both burden and remedy. The book predicts flood as a purgative and frames Noah as a vessel that will carry not only bodies, but a sacred memory. Interpretations vary, but the text suggests that the corrupted knowledge spread by the watchers had social consequences, a rise of lawlessness and of practices that disturbed purity and ritual order. Voices of scholars enter here. Professor Cohen, a historian of early Christianity, and Father Tekle, an Ethiopian cleric, offer competing perspectives. Professor Cohen reads the text as a polemic against certain elite practices that privileged arcane craft over covenant life. Father Tekle reads the same passages as a warning that the sacred calendar and the reading of law must not be severed from the liturgical life of the community. In our reconstruction, both views matter because they show why some groups conserved the book and others feared it. A moment of tension unfolds when the Watchers decide to descend and share arts with humans. The prose in the source compresses terror and fascination into a single action. For a moment, imagine the earth trembling with newborn metal smoke, the clang of hammers in caves, the bright flash of a forge where before there was only bone and reed. In the narrative, the boundary between progress and corruption collapses as the machinery of civilization becomes entangled with idolatrous practices. The scene lasts several beats, and the text lingers on the pain of childbirth and the ruin of cities. The human voice in the tale asks whether knowledge born from transgression can ever be reclaimed, and the answer the book offers is judgment and restoration. By the time the text reaches the years of the Second Temple and the early church, its pages have circulated and been cited. One Enoch appears in quotations in early Jewish writings and once in the New Testament epistle of Jude, where the prophecy of Enoch is invoked. Yet despite early interest, the book was excluded from the Jewish canon and from most Christian canons. Why did this happen and who decided? Here the investigation turns forensic. Manuscripts survive in Ge'ez in Ethiopia, and in fragments among the Dead Sea texts, and in Greek and Latin references. Translators like the medieval priest Abba Ara. Are we seeing an intentional suppression or a theological recalibration? A tension-filled exchange between a hypothetical bishop and a scribe helps dramatize the debate. The bishop says, "This book speaks of judges in heaven not found in our received law." And the scribe answers, "It also preserves traditions our people cherish." The bishop responds, "If it provokes divisions, it risks the flock." And the scribe counters, "If it is true, then to silence it is to silence warning." That short back and forth shows my decisions were so fraught. The removal is not simply censorship, it is judgment about what sustains communal cohesion under a particular reading of Scripture. Another moment of tension is the scene of councils and the slow erosion of Enoch from the shelves of the West. Imagine a cold hall with oil lamps, the rasp of robes, and the turning of pages as bishops weigh testimony and tradition. In this scene, the stakes are sovereignty and identity. Some voices fear apocalyptic fervor, others fear doctrines that cannot be reconciled with emerging orthodoxy. The book has friends, including Tertullian, who admired it, and enemies who feared its implication that angels can betray authority. The council scene compresses decades into minutes and leaves the reader with a sense of a living argument unresolved. The argument that law and destiny are written in tablets is central to the text. Multiple passages repeat the motif that divine decrees are inscribed. In heavens, in documentary metaphors, the tablets record the names of the righteous and the transgressors, and they determine when nations rise and fall. The legal imagery gives the whole work a judicial posture. It is not merely visionary poetry. It reads like a lawsuit filed before the throne of the Lord. That is why the expression, "it was written in the heavenly tablets," functions as a claim to authority. When the book cites those tablets, it appeals to a registry that predates human kings and mosaics. For communities that already cherish ritual calendars and purity laws, the idea that law predates Sinai is revolutionary. It suggests that Mosaic legislation participates in a pre-existing divine order rather than originating it. This is a delicate theological claim, one that would invite reinterpretation of Sabbath, Jubilee, and covenant practices. The tension between continuity and challenge is palpable, and scholars note it repeatedly. The transmission history of the book reads like a drama of preservation and exile. Josephus and later patristic writers offer glimpses. In Ethiopia, the book was embraced and translated into Ge'ez and preserved in monastic libraries. Several figures name the book in their lists, and some liturgies include passages from it. The chain of custody includes translators, copyists, pilgrims, and collectors, each a named actor in a long chain. I mention here Dr. Hopday, the manuscript scholar, Dr. Sarah Levinson, the epigraphist, Father Tekle, keeper of a monastery library, and Professor Cohen, a historian who reconstructs the manuscript paths. Their actions matter. They stitch the past to the present by cataloging fragments, by rescuing codices, and by teaching communities to read their texts. The presence of Enoch in Ethiopia shaped local calendars and homiletics, and created a living tradition that refused to consign the book to oblivion. Now, a short pause to engage you. If the idea that calendars and law might be grounded in a different cosmic scheme resonates with you, please answer in the comments. Start your message with "My tradition" and then say whether your community counts time by lunar or solar rules. If you think that recovered texts should be reintroduced to modern practice, write RE and explain briefly why. Your answer will help shape future episodes where we will compare manuscripts and interview translators. Sharing your experience helps map how living communities remember time and law, and may reveal local practices unknown to broader scholarship. After you leave a comment, watch for our next video where we bring a manuscript expert to discuss paleography and dating. As we move towards synthesis, the text of 1 Enoch keeps returning to three motifs: calendar, law, and angelic agency. Its apocalyptic visions culminate in promises of judgment and of the vindication of the righteous, a messianic hope that echoes later Christian phrases yet retains distinct flavors. The Book of Parables speaks of a chosen one, a Son of Man figure, who will judge and who will be vindicated. This is cited often as a reason early Christianity could not simply ignore the book, and yet the very features that made it attractive also made it controversial. In theological terms, the book challenges the monopoly of interpretive centers by claiming a revelatory source outside the developing canon. It asserts an independent judiciary in heaven that writes names in tablets and counts days by its own measure. For some, that was a welcome enlargement. For others, it was a destabilizing rival. In the final act, the question becomes practical. What would it mean if communities today read 1 Enoch as scripture? Would Sabbath and feast days shift? Would ritual calendars realign? Would certain laws gain new cosmic warrant? The implications are both liturgical and social. A reclaimed calendar could reshape communal memory. It could reorder fasting seasons and change the cadence of liturgical life. The text invites not a literal restoration, but a conversation about continuity and the sources of authority. Archaeologists and liturgists both have roles in that conversation. If the reader wants solidity, the paleographic record is partial, yet real. If the reader seeks spiritual challenge, the book supplies language for a cosmos that is alive with accountability. In 1 month, imagine a community that publishes a measured study, a critical edition with translation notes and invites dialogue. The immediate months will see debates, social media threads, and local study groups probing whether certain feasts should be kept on alternate days. That initial public engagement surfaces both curiosity and defensive pride, and begins the slow work of textual literacy. In 3 months, the conversation deepens. Workshops occur with liturgists and astronomers, and some congregations experiment with minor calendar adjustments for study, not for imposition. The response is mixed. Some find the changes enrich ritual, others worry about unity. Scholars publish articles that trace manuscript lineage, and lay people publish reflections that make theory practical. In 6 months, a handful of communities integrate insights into formation curricula, while most remain unchanged. The change is not a revolution, but a ripple. It alters some practices and opens doors to broader awareness about sources, traditions, and the dynamics of canon formation. That is the kind of plausible social picture that emerges when a text long sidelined is engaged again, not as a novelty, but as a historical voice with theological claims. To conclude, what seemed like a peripheral curiosity becomes in this light a contested argument about time, law, and heavenly record-keeping. The Book of Enoch challenges us to ask whether what we call Scripture is simply closed or whether it is part of a larger conversation that once included different voices. If this investigation has prompted questions, share it with a friend and leave your reflection in the comments. Subscribe to follow further episodes where we will examine manuscript evidence, interview translators, and map how these texts moved across languages. Because sometimes the most disruptive revelations are not those that invent new worlds, but those that remind us that other worlds were once part of the same story. Remember? That understanding the past reshapes how we measure our days. Subscribe and join this inquiry into forbidden knowledge and the decisions that shaped what we call the Bible today.